Yes, thank you very much for allowing me to be here again. You don't have to lure me here anymore. It's so heartfelt that you're taking the time here this evening. Today I'm taking you into the world, we could say, of the greatest spiritual healers. And I also include Jesus, and he always healed according to a certain pattern. First, he asked people, do you want to get well? Yes, you can ask, why? But later Sigmund Freud also discovered something like a secondary gain from illness. I'm either depressed or can't function at all anymore. So when people have lost faith in health, things really go downhill. So the important question for him is, do you want to get healthy? Another question is, do you believe? More like, do you believe in me, but do you believe I can heal you? So there is such a power of awakening in people. And the third thing, after a successful healing, he said, go. Your faith has helped you. From today's medical perspective, this is actually the formula for success. All myth, on the contrary. Jesus reflects a capacity that he wants to awaken in all of us, because he didn't want to be worshipped as the only miracle healer at all, but he says, I'm sending you, go. Says, wow, the kingdom of God is here. And by that, from my point of view, he means the possibility in a completely different way. In a completely different way, free and happy way to become human. And so that everything doesn't remain just an assertion tonight, I'll start with a fascinating case story from the present. Tonight, mental healing is such a huge field anyway. Let's actually stay with the foundation and at most the ground floor of mental healing for now. Maybe there will be a continuation at some point. If desired, tonight I would like to move to safe ground so that I can remain a professor at the university. And this means that I am not allowed to claim anything, perhaps later in a second lecture, about mental reverberation, but I have to prove everything. That's why I have my little mini library with me. Joe Dispenza, You Are Your Placebo. I will quote from that today. Then Bruce Lipton, Smart Teeth. So these are my footnotes, and I think it's great that the Dr. Lisa Rankin Rankine wrote it in a beautifully understandable way, explaining why thoughts are stronger than medicine and scientific evidence of the power of self-healing, mind over matter, and then again journalistically for those who want it short. An anecdotic from the television journalist Joachim Faustich, The Healing Consciousness. It is also available commercially on DVD. So I'll start with the fascinating case history of someone who worked as a physiotherapist and then studied medicine, so that he can back up everything from this initial case history. Written by Joe Dispenza. I'm going to have a really nasty accident. Joe Dispenza was a triathlete, and around the age of 21 he had a very nasty car accident. A lady saw him during a bike race and had an off-road vehicle and dragged him about 20 meters before she spotted him. The result was that Joe's 8th vertebra, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th thoracic vertebra, and the first lumbar vertebra were broken. So the fractures went from the shoulder blades to the kidneys. So this would have to be a case where you don't just say spontaneous healing or spontaneous remission, but rather this is the type of materialization miracle. The doctors they saw were all benevolent, but they said everyone should try to have a Harrington rod implanted, which of course limits movement. The danger now was that things would get even worse. The vertebral particles were so shattered that they threatened to cause paralysis if he somehow moved incorrectly. So apart from such an operation, the only prognosis was paralysis. At that time, Joe Dispenza was still young and daring, and he said, just let me go home, I'll stay on my stomach the whole time. As he says, don't move me. And what happened now? Through the power of his mind, he healed himself within about 2 months. After that, he was able to return to work as a physical therapist and do sports without surgery. Now that was something that is more than just thinking positively or will happen again. And because he is now describing it, it is exactly what he did. And that's why I want this post How did Joe Dispenza save himself from paralysis and diagnostically heal shattered spinal vertebrae? He writes that in the first few weeks, I had a tendency to worry about what he didn't want, so he kept thinking, oh God, I might never have been able to walk again. Oh God, this is going wrong. And he is very, very disciplined and always directs his thoughts back to what he wants. And then we can see the difference. If we get a diagnosis that bad, it's probably fatal. Let's see if we can do something else. So the exact opposite is often mobilized. It makes you feel like hell. It scares you. And it's incredibly difficult not to jinx yourself with these bad thoughts afterwards. So Joe lets himself try. It's a struggle at first, to pull his thoughts away from everything bad that lies in wait for him. And he actually has all the reasons. So anyone who says, cheer up, they probably weren't even allowed to do that. So during my meditations on the life I wanted, with a perfectly healthy spine, I often found myself subconsciously thinking about the words the surgeons had told me a few weeks ago, said that I would probably never be able to walk again. So he tries to imagine it, but the doctor's prognosis, so to speak, has a great authority in his head and in his heart. He can hardly figure it out, so it's a fight. That's why I think it's different than just thinking positively. It's a battle of spirits that collide here. And here we come to the first scheme. Do you want to get healthy? Yes, but this, do you believe it? So his faith is actually shattered in the face of the facts, and the fact that so many surgeons have always told him surgery or paralysis. He's visualizing how he can walk again and says, in the middle of my visualizations of how my spine is building up internally, I caught myself thinking about whether I should sell my chiropractic practice. Or while I was mentally practicing to walk again, I found myself imagining what it would be like to sit in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. You already know what I mean. Every time I became so inattentive and my mind wandered to unhelpful thoughts, I started over. I visualized everything again, so that he can walk again, that he maintains his practice, that everything is good again, and that his spinal vertebrae look healthy. What shape they have. He writes that it was annoying, it was frustrating, and honestly, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My comment is that instead of just thinking positively, we first have to learn how to concentrate and how to collect thoughts. He was also able to observe his thoughts so that he noticed when he was wandering. That in itself is a great art, and he was able to build up his own inner images in addition to concentration. That's different than looking at pictures and then disappearing to look at them. So he had trained his imagination. Thinking and feeling through images were trained by him. So again, the difference to just thinking positively. And yet, even though he learned it well, he says it was the hardest thing I'd ever done with, but I wanted to provide these inner observers with a clear, clean, lasting target image. Joe Dispenza knows he programs his body with this internal image of health, and therefore he has to build it again and again. If forces sneak in that destroy the picture, he starts again, so to speak, as if he were throwing away the canvas again and starting over with a new picture. So, in order to bring his inner intelligence to the result I hoped for, he writes, I knew it was possible for her. I believed I had to remain conscious from beginning to end and not drift into the unconscious, so those fluttering and doubting thoughts again. He continues to write, I fought a battle with myself for 6 weeks. I tried to stay present in this awareness, and finally I was able to go through my inner healing process without having to start over again. I remember how I managed it for the first time, and it felt like hitting a tennis ball cleanly. It felt right. Something inside me clicked, and I then felt completely satisfied and whole. For the first time I was truly relaxed and staying present. So being present, which people also learn in Zen Buddhism, is very important. Anyone who is present actively forms desired thoughts. If you are not present, you only react, and are guided by programmed thoughts or by thoughts that others have told you, and these are often false images. So for the first time I was really relaxed and present, mentally and physically, without mental inner chatter, without analyzing, without thoughts, without fixed ideas. Something dissolved, and there was peace and silence, as if I didn't care about all the things I should have worried about in the past and in the future. As far as Joe Dispenza is clear in which area we are moving, so there is mental training behind it, and that would be what the second part would be about. Nevertheless, I would also like to give a lot of examples of how people have healed and bewitched themselves almost by accident, and which, yes, I almost said ghosts because it is still so rare, are now also wandering through the literature of doctors. So you also want to get healthy with Joe Dispenza, right? Do you think this is a fight with him? A battle of concentration, a battle of thoughts, and a battle of inner images, and ultimately healing. Your faith has helped you. So faith is not just a vague yes, maybe, and not just a trust in something, but it has contact. He knows there is this inner healer. He has to give him a clear picture, and this inner healing power helped him. He was able to activate it. In fact, it was a miracle of materialization. But I also bring a common opposite story that is also known in the medical literature. Doctors in particular have a great deal of responsibility in which direction they direct the patient's strength. And in this case, we actually have a very caring doctor. I'll say it in advance, unfortunately the patient still died. But he has both. Here it is a patient who apparently heals himself by chance, but then unfortunately also kills himself again, apparently by thought. So these mechanisms are unfamiliar. The whole thing was published in 1957 by the psychologist Bruno Klopfer. You don't have to say that exactly. I'll summarize it briefly. A man now had, I think, a very large metastasis, that is to say cancer in the final stage, and now the newspapers reported, so we are roughly before 1957, now the newspapers reported about a new drug against cancer, which the doctor administered. I think it gave the patient an injection, and the cancer disappeared. This patient's belief was now directed quite literally at what the newspapers wrote, so he firmly trusted this newspaper report. He now awakened the inner healer in him. All these images. Wow, I would be healthy again. Yes, and unfortunately you wrote that a tumor disappeared literally overnight. The doctor was thrilled. Now, unfortunately, the newspapers wrote a while later. There are doubts as to whether this drug is that good. Within a few days, the patient had a huge tumor again. The doctor's concept, he was so awake, and the doctor's concept, so what was going on here? And he now found something. So he now took on the role of the newspaper report and said, yes, yes. This only applies to this original drug, but there is now a further development. The doctor just made that up, because he hadn't choked on the drug beforehand, and the patient still got well. That's always the question. It's just a placebo effect. Most people who understand this find it really exciting. Who or what is the placebo effect? That's why Joe Dispenza calls his book, You Are the Placebo. And I would like to talk about it in more detail. You are the healer, you have the inner healer within you. Like Jesus Christ, this is a mental strength that needs to be trained, like someone who wants to play volleyball well or swim well. So you can't immediately throw everyone into the water and say, yes, everyone can swim. Yes, but I'm drowning. So swimming training is necessary beforehand, and it's a shame that our culture doesn't take it so seriously yet. So the doctor now took on the role of activating this inner healer in the patient, because he had performed a miracle, the patient himself, and now said, yes, yes, that's a variant, and again. The patient became completely healthy. It worked out that the doctor now took on the role of the newspaper report, and after a while these mean newspapers wrote that unfortunately there was nothing at all with this medication, and after a short time the patient died. And this case is also documented. It's not just something made up. So I now have the two examples. They are both extreme areas of someone who likes to have miracles of materialization on the one hand, and then a second patient who also wants to get well again. Do you believe it? He believed it, and then your faith helped you, but after that, he believes I have to die, and unfortunately, he killed himself, and then unfortunately, the doctor couldn't activate it anymore. I'm bringing another really exciting story. It's now from Bruce Lipton, because I don't want it to just be about, oh, it's just something psychological or something. You can still make excuses. Oh, that was psycho. He was a bit unstable or something. I'm now talking about knee operations, sham operations, which also helped. And again, it was all about activating the inner healer. They are, so to speak, average people. It's about the following study, which was published in 2002. Namely in the New England Journal of Medicine, so in a real medical journal in 2002. And this is now a real scientific study, otherwise you always say yes, what do you call it, anecdotal evidence or something like that. So she is still, the patients were monitored by the Baylor School of Medicine. Now it's about patients with severe knee pain. Dr. Bruce Moseley led the investigation. He was convinced of this because he also worked as a surgeon. My operations help patients. He just wanted to find out in a study that I have 2 surgical procedures. Which is better? During one procedure, he ground away damaged cartilage in the knee, and then the patients were healthy again and the symptoms were gone. In the second procedure, he washed away the damaged tissue so that the inflammation could then subside. So the whole joint was rinsed and all inflammatory material was removed. And of course, in such studies, there is another comparison group, namely patients for whom nothing was done. But so that they could be included in the process to some extent, they were sham operated on, but they also had a bad knee. But nothing was removed from the broken knee, i.e., neither the cartilage was ground down nor the inflamed tissue was washed away. In this third group, with the sham operation, the patient was anesthetized. Moseley made the standard 3 incisions, and he talked and moved as if he were performing surgery. He even splashed some salt water to mimic the sounds of washing his knees. After 40 minutes, Moseley sewed the incisions closed again, as he would have done in a normal operation. Afterwards, all 3 groups received exactly the same post-operative treatment, which included a gymnastics program. Now let's imagine that these fake operated people, all the inflammation was actually left in, should now also do recovery exercises. So now they have the knee pain plus these scars and everything. Well, Moseley was shocked. Of course, the first 2 groups, those with cartilage scraped and those with joint irrigation, felt better. Unfortunately, also the third group. And now they actually wanted to prove which of the 2 procedures was better. So he didn't expect that he had now actually proven that he had actually activated the inner healer in really visibly sick people. So actually, all that needs to be overcome in every person is the doubt that they can be cured. And so the patients in the third group now had a little easier time than with Joe, who was constantly working with inner images and concentration. But for the one patient, we now have an external reason. Yes, the medication helps, says the newspaper or says my doctor, and here again the belief in the doctor. So the doctor triggers belief. Every year, 650,000 atrial knees are operated on. Each costs about $5,000. It was clear to Moseley, he said honestly, it wasn't my surgical skills that helped these people. The benefit of osteoarthritic knee surgery can only be attributed to the placebo effect. The television programs were also honest about the amazing results. They even showed the members of the placebo group. Yes, do we still want to do something with doors? Can we still let the lovely people in there? So, the TV even showed the members of the placebo group going hiking, playing basketball, all the things that they really couldn't do before the surgery, so that people say, hey, you used to be a simulant. They had been examined. These patients were kindly notified until 2 years after the sham operation that they were only being operated on as a sham. Let's think of our poor deceased cancer patient from the other example from 1957. One member of this archery group was named Tim Parrots. Before the operation, he could only walk with a cane. Now he played football with his grandchildren. And he said, when he was even interviewed by the Discovery Channel, anything is possible in this world. When you put your mind to it, I know that our minds can perform miracles. And that is my introductory topic. There is this spirit in each of them. And that's just the question. How do I activate it? Of course, if you've been treated like this for years, oh, you're a serious case. It's almost hopeless. I'm trying my best. And then when you realize, oh God, nothing has helped me, then of course it's harder to get that inner healer going again. I think these are such hopeful results that even in the materialistic culture that says we are actually nothing more than a lump of matter, that even now these tests have now proven, mind over matter, that our minds program all of this. Unfortunately, sometimes for the worse. Yes, another very funny example from early medical history, including Bruce Lipton. Another real miracle. When I was still studying theology, I'll start there. There is, I think, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, a place that says, they will eat and drink poison, and it will not harm them. Maybe even snake bites are mentioned. And because theologians actually always doubt biblical texts, this is called historical criticism according to the mode, Knut can't do it, Peter can't do it either, and I also asked Hansen, he can't do it either, so Jesus couldn't have done it either. When I was still studying with Baptists at the time, and the food in the study house sometimes really didn't taste good, we always said as a joke, oh God, do you think that the ending of Matthew's Gospel is real? We need that today. But we now have the answer to this area from the history of medicine. Actually, the interpretation. We are at the time when Robert Koch discovered that something as nasty as cholera is caused by viruses and bacteria. So maybe you're still thinking about Otto Walkes's sketch. I think I found the tubercle. I have to call him for a hello Robbie or something. I am the tubercle. So the tubercle was happy to have been discovered by Otto Walkes, but Robert Koch's colleagues considered him a madman. Because back then people were basically as into it as they are today. I didn't see what I didn't see doesn't exist. So there is a lack of measurement methods, and so they want to die until the measurement methods for our healing power are discovered. I think one day this will also be determined using electromagnetic frequencies with high frequencies. What do the frequencies have to be like so that the healer in us is activated? But Robert Koch's critics found it so ridiculous that he claimed that there are viruses and bacteria, and a colleague was so convinced that this theory was wrong that he now drank a whole glass of water full of Kohler bacteria in front of witnesses to prove that it doesn't matter to him. It didn't hurt him either, poor Robert Koch. So this man was right and wrong at the same time. These bacteria are of course wrong, but at the same time, he was right, because the critic had activated the inner healer. Now be careful if you think I'll go out and he'll sneeze on me. Now I'm definitely infected. Their spirit has the ability to hex them themselves, to do voodoo on them. I think the only thing behind all the voodoo is the very, very bad trigger that we then activate. I still feel sorry for the people out there. We too might be taking a mini break. A side note for those who are still in there, the whole thing is being recorded. I have now set up a YouTube channel. Then you simply enter a Mystic and Coaching Prof Bobert at the top of this search line. I just did it like that, so that you really end up with the channel Mystic and Coaching Prof Bobert. And I have now uploaded everything that has been recorded so far. And these include opulent lectures like today. But I will soon be filming short 3-minute and 7-minute clips on topics that you want. Of course, I will work through this one after the other over time. At the moment, I'm still struggling a bit with such a fairly professional editing program, but I always imagine that I've already made it when I want to give up. Leave it alone, you're over 50. This is for young people who grow up with it. In this respect, it should also be interactive, in that they themselves, as I said, also write, please do something about dying and death, or some people would also like me to say something about Bible passages, the Bible from a mystical point of view, and I think they're all great ideas. So what will be implemented? It will be something like mystic television. So I'm going to continue with the topic here. Otherwise, there is also something like the practice of people walking over hot coals. And these things are really hot. And everything that is done with them is to activate the inner healer beforehand. And once you have experienced this in something that is really dangerous, you know that you can transfer it to other areas, mental illnesses, allergies, or something similar. Of the many cases that have now been proven, including in truly monitored studies, the people who were told under hypnosis, for example, oh, now put this coin on your forearm, it's red hot. It was at room temperature, but under hypnosis, people immediately developed huge blisters. On the contrary, there was a Japanese study on children who had a total allergic reaction to a certain substance, and he was actually in the room, but they were told the opposite, and so their allergy was not triggered. So there are so many examples of who likes to read something like that, Joachim Faulstich, The Healing Consciousness. Then I quoted from Bruce Lipton, who is a molecular biologist. So this is a rather popular one here. This is a scientist who wrote this book together with a really great journalist so that people actually enjoy reading it at the end. Molecular biologist. And anyway, because he has researched it, he goes so far that he says that it is not the individual cell that is sick, but the fluid in which it moves. When you convert seemingly diseased tissue into a healthy environment, from the fluid, from the nutrient solution, even the healthy cells. If you put healthy cells in a diseased solution, they become diseased. So these are the control signals. And about Bruce Lipton, he also has a lot on YouTube. I think most of it is English, but I haven't checked that carefully. I'll continue now. So we have very important basics, maybe one more, if you don't want to look old so quickly. There is a really great rejuvenation experiment by a clinical, even a psychoanalyst, who also does scientific research, so people can also do a doctorate with her. Ellen Lang is the name of her and the book Turning Back the Clock. Unfortunately, her mother died after a cancer diagnosis, but in fact, the cancer wasn't the cause at all. She just believed in the diagnosis, and that hurt Langer so much that she is now in charge of this area too. And a great experiment, let's see, so I don't really invent anything about it. 17. Of course, you can also read it directly in your book. Yes, we are in 1981, when the following experiment was of course also medically examined. Ellen Langer got on a bus with 8 old men who she had actually taken from a nursing home, with the permission of the men and their relatives, of course, and she drove to an empty monastery north of Boston. And this experiment only lasted 5 days. The monastery was now furnished as it had been 22 years ago, so I'm making things up a bit now, but it was something like this: shaving brushes and newspapers and old radio from which the music from back then came, political broadcasts that were recorded about the Fidel Castro crisis. And these men shouldn't say, lust is an experiment, but rather just behave as if things were the same again. So play along, as if they had now been beamed, and that would be a journey through time. So they could look through old issues of Life magazine or the Saturday Evening Post and also watch the stupid movies and TV shows that were popular in 1959. They heard Perry Como and Nat King Cole music on the radio. Yes, and talked about baseball idols and boxing greats of the time. Yes, the crazy thing again, the inner healer had been activated. Well, these 5 days were enough for them to now, so they didn't have to concentrate like Joe Dispenza did with his spinal vertebrae, but the same thing was activated by the environment. afterwards Ellen Langer was even able to play football with them, so physical illnesses had now disappeared. Carrying suitcases was so mean. Ellen Langer actually traveled half the distance in the bus with an assistant. The assistant then had to get out, and they had taken suitcases with them, and now Ellen Lang said to herself, I can't carry them, but the people can't carry them either because they were so sick. Then she said, do it little by little. We have a lot of time and the like. So if you imagine internally, Ellen Lang also researched how old people think they will become and what diseases they can expect in old age. The most striking thing is again in the unconscious, that you simply assume that my mother got so old and died of heart disease, and I'm sure the same thing happened to me too. Ellen Langer has investigated and proven it. This makes it clear that it is extremely important that you determine your own lifespan and form an inner picture of it like Joe did. How does it look? I'm tinkering with it myself, and I deal a lot with aging ranges in literature, so blue belt. Where in the world do people live very old? What's special? Very common characteristics are that they simply like to live in social groups, and they are not retiring now. Oh, and I'm old news, but they do exactly one favorite activity, and it gives their life meaning. So, no fear of survival, being socially involved, and continuing to have an activity that they take very seriously, from gardening and the like. And in that respect, I see it almost as voodoo. If you now tell our culture that, yes, it's been scientifically proven, you'll all definitely have dementia and the like, and that you're already taking part in long-term care insurance, but then it would be important to know what are factors that drive people into dementia. For example, white industrial sugar or a lack of omega-3 fatty acids, because our brain needs them. So it's now even used to cure people with Parkinson's and severe depression and the like. So as soon as you don't come to terms with what others tell you, you're in a position where my thesis is now easily 120 to 160 years old. We'll put this into nature birds, and then you'll behave much more consciously. Yes, I've heard anyway that here in Eckenförde or here in the north, people still run marathons or swim at 80 or something like that, which was quite dangerous here anyway. So if you perhaps forget everything from tonight, do yourself the favor of thinking about where I actually got my concept, that I have to die with then and then because you program it. This is your role model for old age, and you implement it little by little. The most exciting thing at the moment is not genes, but epigenetics, which is also Bruce Lipton's area. The genes are simply a library, but which book should I grab? Something defective in walking, or that I have saved the inner image again? For example, whatever. Think of poor Joe Dispenza. Because you look in the mirror and think, I'm 17 years young. Oh God, I should let it go. But think of it like a fluid in the body. Go, I know there were difficult times and days, but imagine, remember, or create the inner picture and body feeling of a happy day from back then, and epigenetics is that simple. The brain reacts immediately and releases the neurotransmitters and neuropeptides, so releases the signals into the cell fluid so that another library is now activated. And on top of that, they will then be much more conscious of themselves and just let certain things be. If you say to yourself, I only have 5 years left anyway. If you say, oh God, but let's leave it alone. So think about it instead of saying, no, I'll have rooms for another 40 years. Do I want that? So then delete that with the rooms too. So that's all the evidence and a first small practical conclusion so that it doesn't get too boring. Now, how does medicine respond to things like this? Fortunately, there are now really great doctors who understand what is going on, because in the medical world there are always these spontaneous, so-called spontaneous healings or miraculous healings. And now, if you want to follow up tonight, I'll move on to Lisa Rankin, Why Thoughts Are Stronger Than Medicine. The author herself is a doctor in this typical, let's say, old school, and writes about herself after 12 years of classical medical training and after 8 years of clinical experience, completely indoctrinated by conventional medical doctrine. So you can see that the doctors don't mean anything bad, but that's the starting point. And if there is voodoo in their heads, how are they supposed to reconcile that with what you are experiencing? And that's why they can't activate the healer if that happens. Well, because I was thoroughly indoctrinated by the conventional medical doctrines, which I revered like the Bible. I refused to believe anything that wasn't proven by a clinical, reproducible, double-blind study. So what we had with the knee operations. What's more, I was the daughter of my father, who, as a die-hard conventional doctor, made fun of anything that sounded even remotely esoteric. Accordingly, I was as stubborn and cynical as one can be. The medicine that I had learned to practice offered no room for the idea that people can make themselves healthy or sick using the power of their thoughts and emotions. My professors also classify some illnesses that cannot be explained biochemically as psychosomatic, so of course that is always the solution. But whenever they saw the cause solely in the patient's head, they rolled their eyes and, shaking their heads and without further comment, wrote out a referral to a psychologist. So, how does Lissa Rankin move forward from this view? First of all, these are exactly the things that are happening in droves now, but of course these are not studies, because it is unethical to make someone extra sick for comparison. And she said that the medical community is talking behind closed doors about the case of a woman whose malignant tumor disappeared during radiation therapy. And later the doctors realized that the radiation machine was defective and that she didn't get a shred of radiation. She just believed it. What does that mean now? So it's so hard. Look, who or what could activate this inner healer within you? Just imagine some kind of tunnel there yourself, or put a viewing hammer in there, but that's just us taking something as a stimulus that triggers the inner healer. But that's always the proof. It's there. She just believed it, and so did her doctors. So it's something like a community of believers. That's why spiritual communities often form, and even in the psychology of success. So, when it comes to this, how do I become a successful businessman as a seemingly loser? First, move away from the field that doesn't believe in you, that keeps giving you doubts, that belittles you, and find a community that shares your hopes and big visions. So that's the analogy to the church community or the monastery. And if, on the contrary, they are in a church community that doesn't believe in it, they leave it, it robs them of their life force. Or do they just go to beautiful things, to the choir? Yes, that has also been proven. Whoever sings is healthier. Anything that has to do with long exhalations alone triggers a very deep healing process. So, another patient with stage IV lymphoma, who was already in the intensive care unit, and whose organs were shutting down one by one, had a near-death experience in which she was immersed in pure, unconditional love. My comment: this is the very essence of us humans, and they don't even have to die or have near death. But the most important thing I try to do is to connect people with it here and now. So we are currently living under a deep personality split, which has been suggested to us by our surroundings, that we are small, that life is difficult, that everything is anyway here, that we can't do anything, that we are in lumps of matter. Then you don't get the idea that Jesus says in parables, there is a field, but there is treasure in it. There is a wonderful pearl. Dig them up. So if you don't know it's inside you, you don't look for it. We need people to simply make this clear to us again. So, this woman always had the chance to involuntarily immerse herself in her being through a near-death experience. Pure, unconditional love. She immediately realized that her cancer would disappear in an instant if she decided not to cross over to the other side, i.e., death. Less than a month later, a new biopsy of the lymph nodes no longer revealed any cancer cells. If you want to watch this as a story on YouTube, not my video channel. Ingrid Maria Bachor, like Bach and Oerm. This is a friend of mine who had the same thing happen to her. So he died full of metastatic disease and returned completely healed in a near-death experience. That's how I got to know her. She now has all mystical abilities that others have been meditating for 20 or 30 years. So she can separate her soul and spirit from her body and take a look at my living room if she wants. And that's always a little scary. But these are all things that are released within us when, as I like to say, we are kept in a species-appropriate manner. In order to heal physically, our teeth need love and deep relaxation, not a fight for survival. And our minds need to know who we really are so that we can run with a clear vision of ourselves and not constantly fight against ourselves and mentally beat ourselves up. So unfortunately, Healthy too, early, she then asks around among her colleagues and hears that many of her colleagues also know such individual cases. And she increasingly struggles with her profession. She actually loves it. She says, I felt called to become a doctor, just as others feel called to become priests. I didn't set out to write routine prescriptions, like examining one patient after another on an assembly line. So that's the US medical establishment anyway. After 20 years of professional experience, I had no illusions about our American one. The broken healthcare system was lost to a system that required me to process 40 patients every day in a time window of a maximum of 7.5 minutes each, leaving hardly any room for a conversation, let alone building a sustainable doctor-patient relationship. So that they don't complain about the poor doctors. That's the reality. And then she's so honest that she says it makes her really sick. So she first gave up her job, had a blow on the internet, wrote about it, collected these cases, and then she returned to her job full of hope and strength. But she was a different doctor now. And the great thing is, how does she deal with it now that she has discovered this inner healer? Patients who can't do that and don't want to do something so esoteric, ask them first. So your goal is for patients to write themselves a prescription. So now this is the practical part. We are moving there. Oh, what do I do now? I don't feel like meditating that much yet. She first asks the patient what is wrong with them, also in a large comprehensive sense. Maybe I'm missing a fulfilling professional life, or I'm missing time for myself. So what are they missing? First of all, that's the comprehensive thing, and then first of all, that happened to you by chance. First of all, she just wanted to ask the patients, what do you think could be the deeper cause of your illness? And then she wanted to hear, oh, I eat too much caterpillage, or oh, I don't exercise enough. And the patients immediately listened to the question with their soul, a real important one. They said, for example, I need more time for myself, or I am so lonely that I cry myself to sleep every night, or I hate myself so much I can't look at myself in the mirror. And then that's what it looks like when we determine that. Because, for example, a friendless life, that's also a reason, so it's a cause of death. So that's another digression, and I'll continue writing this recipe so that we have everything more comprehensive again. What does it take if you want to heal yourself? There is a dissertation. I'll do the dissertation first, and then another monastery examination in a real monastery. In his dissertation, Kelly A. Turner examined people who spontaneously healed and put together characteristics that he had heard from these conversations with people, including dietary changes, so that people have largely given up meat, sugar, and dairy products and white flour. Second, stronger spiritual focus. Many patients Turner interviewed, or now healed patients, spoke of feeling supported by a loving energy deep within. Third, more love, joy, happiness, and contentment. So not everyone had exactly all of these characteristics. Some rich people did. Others attributed their ability to share themselves to the fact that more love, happiness, and contentment had now found their way into their lives. Then allowing suppressed emotions, i.e., sometimes allowing and showing fear, where sadness, then taking herbal nutritional supplements, and finally trusting in your own inner voice. So here it is called intuition. So that you no longer let others tell you anything, or give up responsibility, or let yourself be guided, neither by doctors or anything like that. When it is the clear inner knowledge that the healer is in me, they let themselves be guided by it. The most important thing that we can learn from Lissa Rankin, the doctor here, is that simply changing your diet is not enough. What are they missing? So we see this connection, this access to love, and when her patients have to write out a prescription for themselves, she asks them questions about different areas of life, and one of them is the inner guiding light. So it's just eating, but continuing to live an unhappy life doesn't achieve anything. And the inner guiding light, these are really great questions. Do I lead an authentic life in harmony with everything I want? And then I admit that the way I teach at university is not completely in line with what is often in people is fear, including other fears that we have inherited from others. And that's why she asks the question, who would I be if I wasn't afraid? This is so honest and so loving, but that helps us for now. They will only achieve in life what they have a guiding principle about, what they did to them at school. Others demanded that they achieve something and set a time goal for them, but for example about something that they didn't want to have as a goal, and if they do the same thing, i.e. lifestyle, also in the area of partnership or joy or something like that, they set themselves this goal like they did back in school and date it. But first of all, it's important, what goals do I actually have? Because that would be very little in demand here. What do you want? So, what would your life be like if you weren't afraid? And the most important thing is not to beat yourself up in fear, but to remind yourself so often that I already have this life. Then they have a completely different, changed perception of all the opportunities that literally surround them, and also to the area, i.e. inner guiding ray, what is there in me that I am holding back? What craves to be let out? So that's part of it. So just green smoothies, which I eat myself, don't help. So that's still too materialistic when it comes to illness. What are they missing, for example? This listening to the inner guiding ray, which I also put very far forward. Then, career vocation is an important area for her. Now again, so that you don't always just think, oh, there's no other way, I don't like this anymore. I think what I'm doing is pointless, but I get paid well. Therefore, first develop your own vision again. And she asks the question, if I and my family were completely financially secure, what would I do with my time? Yes, yes. Or if I were to take fear out of the equation in the same area of vocational callings, what impact would that have on my daily routine? And then it becomes more concrete. My job is a bridge that brings me closer to my goals. And finally, perhaps the external environment. I live in the place where my inner guiding light wants to live. In any case, he increasingly took me from Berlin to Kiel without even asking, and maybe that will lead even more out to sea. But I'm also surrounded by beautiful things when it comes to being worth something to yourself and not just caring for others. So put a little bit into the apartment so that you don't keep anything. My sister loved it so much and I can't throw it away or anything like that. So that's the way to activate the whole thing. How do I actually implement this myself when I work with people? It's actually a viable path, little by little. First, now in Kiel, in my seminars or throughout Germany, I teach people that they really have something like the power of concentration, that they first learn to bundle it, like diffuse it. Light becomes a laser. Positive thinking alone is not enough. Then I try to teach them that they can control feelings through inner images. Just like I told you now, remember this, or imagine this feeling. Body feeling is also enough. It is always the body feeling that is important, not the image. How would I feel if I was 17 again now, and did you do it? That's a feeling, the oops, here I come, the world is my oyster. The adults may then begin to say internally, yes, grow up or get better in life. That's the mistake. That's why the culture looks like that. So even when they're feeling bad, they remind themselves of that very, very often. For me, it wasn't like Joe Dispenza, but after my riding accident in 2002, I wasn't able to do any sport for 10 years. And the doctors then said, oh, here 2 vertebral bodies touch above the sacrum, the intervertebral disc is flat. And yes, that is pain when touched, and yes, rheumatic change there in a cervical vertebra. So I now had it in writing, and we can put it in an MRI tube twice a year and inject pain relief. Then I thought, no, I wouldn't be your customer because I've already worked with these exercises, so I don't have the Dispenza caliber. And then I just kept imagining it, without even knowing his books at the time, because I knew that, the power of thoughts and vision. I couldn't smoke in the morning, I couldn't bend over and put on socks or lift anything for 2 hours. I always had this kind of pain in the morning. And then I imagined that I could jog again. I dated it. This is important. In a year I'll be able to jog again, and then I got cheeky. And in 2 years I'll be in better shape than before. Before the accident I had trained with Berlin marathon runners. Always only 10 kilometers. That was enough for me because they had a killer pace. But dating this now, and what happened? My perception changed at first. Instead, I said to myself, oh, nothing's going to work now. Well, with that goal. Because I had hope. Well, you can go for a walk now. The old lap you jog. Oh God, 7 kilometers, well, do some of it. Because I was a bit grumpy, I then weighed 16 kilograms more than I do now. So the old round. I increasingly realized that yes, it works. Then I thought, yes, you can do that now. It's a bigger burden on the job. Do you also put on a backpack with water bottles? Then you have more stress. And then I started reading books about how bully, apathetic, poor people were trained for marathons by a doctor because he says anyone can run a marathon. I think the book was called From 0 to 40 or something. And how did they do that? Walk for 2 minutes, jog for 1 minute. That was so embarrassing. I was overtaken by joggers. So that was another crisis of pride, and I said to myself, what is your goal? To be proud and not be seen here? Even your sports clothes no longer fit you at all. And then I thought, well, I don't sweat doing it anyway. It doesn't matter what I wear. Almost no one sees me. So the most important thing is your own vision. Nobody will take that away from them. And then they look for people who share it, because everyone has burglaries too. So I train the ability to concentrate, the basic ability to build visions, and then that takes place in July, mid-July even. 5 days in Kiel of mental healing. How does that work? And these are also the spiritual principles. Now, I was a bit shy. It's just a lecture, and whoever comes back knows that it's also about the transfer of brain frequencies. There is a basis for diving into deep love. And because that's our nature anyway, it's just a matter of clearing the channel for it to flow. Because the church also says that it is true, it is all grace. If we translate that into German, everything is already there. We don't have to create anything. Zen Buddhists also say that. What you're looking for is the glasses on your nose. You are a clear spirit. You are conscious. Don't look for it outside. Maybe that's all for today, but it's not entirely practical. But what you guys should take away is pay attention to your inner vision. Beat the hell out of yourself. Spin straight above the gridiron. I was severely depressed until my mid-30s. And looking back, I see I was a brilliant meditator, but I had no control over the whole thing. Do you mean all the people who do voodoo with you and, if possible, stay in an environment that promotes this healer in you? Thanks for the attention.